everyone for being here. I'm Yvan Sadji. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Seabird Working Group. Together with Rain and Austin and Ed Sutton. We're here today on our second species hours, which is a different type of webinar that we started this year, 2023, to prepare for conservative Caribbean Seabird Census. The idea is to have not just like a webinar where we present something, but more of a discussion about specific guilds of seabirds. Last time, back in January, we had one on large tree nesting seabirds, pelicans, boobies, frigate birds. This time today, this one will be on cavity nesters, so very limited set of species, 2 species of tropicbirds, one of shearwaters and one of petrels. Just quickly, our next species hours will be on ground nesters, the one that nest in large colonies, so terns, noddies, and laughing gulls. And we're hoping to get that for either the end of March or beginning of April. Just a reminder, so yeah, 2023 is already here. It's been here for about a month, or actually 2 months now. And this coordinated survey, seabird survey, has started as well. So there are already work going on. Those pictures are from the Turks and Caicos Islands. We know there's work going on pelicans, which have been nesting already from starting in October, November, December, all the way to here. Same for tropicbirds and other species. Just a reminder, the aim of the data collection that we're trying to do, this conserved data collection, is to be able to collect comparable data, to have a standardized data unit, which is going to be apparently occupied nests, and also to obtain as wide as possible a coverage of seabird colonies in the Caribbean. The ultimate goal is to update knowledge of seabirds in the Caribbean, since given that the last census, or at least summary of data, is from at least 10 years old or more. Updating knowledge on population estimates as well as distribution. That will provide data for updating species statues and updating site management. And as well, what we're trying to do with these webinars right now, it's to improve skills in monitoring seabirds, as well as providing support for that. So we are preparing a blog post to summarize all the information we've provided throughout 2022. Hopefully soon we'll send an email with everything we have provided, all the webinars, all the quizzes we've created, also finalizing the data sheet, the field data sheet to use in the field. We have a simple one and then more complex ones. And eventually a reporting sheet where people who want to participate in sharing their data can set up their data using a template. If you have any questions, we created a email address, Caribbean Seabird Surveys @gmail.com. So feel free to send any emails there. I think that would be the best location. And right now we're having these species hour discussions. Just a reminder, sorry, either at the end of this month or next month, we're going to have one on tern, gulls, and noddies, and how to census those large colonies of ground nesting seabirds. So on this, I think we'll start. So I see more people coming in. I'll just go through to see who is here. Great. I'll just start introducing people we have with us with experience in cavity nesting seabirds. Just quickly myself, my limited experience is on black-cap petrel, so the only territorial petrel in the Caribbean basin. Well, there is also the Bermuda petrel in Bermuda, which is also trying to re-enter. Will Mackin?
I'm here.
Okay, looks like you were re-entering. Anyway, maybe somebody else. So yeah, anyway, my experiment is with black-cap petrel, which is a bit to census black-cap petrel is a very different way of censusing tropic birds or shearwaters. So that will be on the side. So Will McKenna is here with ample experiments on cavity nesters. So can you introduce yourself, Will?
Yes, let me see. I'm muted somehow. Unmute. Because I have to hold the space bar. Can you guys hear me? Okay, you can hear me.
I think you're good.
Yeah, so I'm Will Mack, and I've done a lot of work in the Bahamas and also a few other places, but mostly the Bahamas on white-tailed tropic birds and Audubon shearwaters, which are two very different cavity nesters. And the short thing I would say is if you want to know how to, like shearwaters are very hard to survey, and tropic birds are challenging, but they're not that hard to count once you get used to finding them. You can probably, their colonies are usually small enough that you can count most of the breeding pairs while you're there in an afternoon, and then you'll have to figure out some way to figure out which percentage of birds you missed, because you're going to miss probably 25% on every count. So you probably need to do some repeat surveys with your crew in the same locations multiple days and see how many of the nests you find each time. And then with Audubon shearwaters, I can't really do it justice how challenging it is, but I did try to publish a paper in 2015 that I put a link to in the chat that describes everything I did for Audubon shearwaters. The most important thing to know is whether they're on a place, and the second most important thing to know is how dense they are, and the third thing is, are there introduced predators there? Because it's usually there aren't any birds if they're over the long term, if there's introduced rats or mice, or at least the population will be struggling. So those are the most important things to get, I would say. And then I can, try to answer questions or help anybody. I really want to know who out there is in the Bahamas doing any work right now, because I'm not, but I would love to help if I can. So if you have any questions, let me know.
Actually, as we were talking, if anybody has been doing work on tropic bird shearwaters, petrels, can you raise your hand? There should be an option at the bottom of your screen. So this way we'll be able to call you out using the screen option. Well, thank you, Hannah. So moving on to Hannah Madden, who used to be based on St. Eustatius. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Yes, as Ivan says, I was based on St. Eustatius, Dutch Caribbean. I was there for 16 years. And because it's a small island, the tropicbird was the only species of seabird that nests there. So by default, I ended up studying it. And what a wonderful species it was to study. I have no regrets. And I was lucky enough to work with Will and with Ivan and with Pat and others. So in fact, currently I'm doing my PhD on the red-billed tropicbird. So I can probably go on for hours and hours about it. But as Will says, they're relatively straightforward to, if you can access your colony like we were able to by foot, then you have a good chance of being able to conduct, some pretty good field work. If on the other hand, you're unable to access and they're up on a very steep cliff on a remote island, then probably your best bet is going to be doing something like an aerial count. And then the best time of day to do that is going to be in kind of late afternoon from 3-ish, 3:30 till about 5:30, and then this is when they're all flying around, and then you would do a count, every 5 minutes, and over time the numbers will drop off, and so you can kind of try to estimate your population. So it really depends on your question. What are you trying to answer? In my case, I had a number of questions which were relating to reproductive success and foraging and things like that. So and also did a little bit of work on Sabre, where they have a much bigger colony, close to 1,500, 2,000 pairs. So the little tiny islands are really important colonies in terms of global significance.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So we'll go more into details of methodologies and the specifics of field work. But thank you. Natalia, you were raising your hand too.
Yeah, hi. So I would say that I agree with Hannah on that. The method of having to do afternoon counts was what were used a lot during the regional seabird breeding atlas, the Lesser Antilles, because it was so hard to access things, especially like on Saba, where you have these cliff nesting birds that are hard to access. And so they kind of gave up on trying to get nest counts. It was more just trying to get aerial counts as some sort of indicator for the population. And then as far as shearwaters, like we've done shearwater surveys on Saba using call playback and getting some response on that. But again, really hard to actually find the nests when they're on cliffs, like they're in deep ravines that were kind of consolidated dirt cliffs that you couldn't really climb. And so in those cases, it was more just a matter of trying to get visuals on them flying around. And we've also used marine radar there to try and detect them flying in at night. You can use that to see them on the screen. You have to know the speed they're traveling at to know how fast the dot should be traveling on the screen to try and guess what it is. And we were able to get some what we perceive to be shearwater detections. But yeah, and then Epic's also done quite a bit of work with petrels, but that's not something I've worked with personally. And then as far as white-tailed tropicbirds, just a little bit on St. Martin, they have actually been extirpated from the site that we were surveying them at, but it required actually rappelling down cliffs. That was rock that was solid enough to do that. So, yeah.
Thank you. And then Rhiannon, yeah, your hand raised.
Hello. Yes, shearwaters are probably my first love in terms of seabirds. So I did my PhD on Mediterranean shearwaters actually. So a lot of my background involves crawling around in caves and catching different species of shearwaters in the Mediterranean. But since I've been working in the tropics, most recently I've been working on Audubon shearwaters in the Turks and Caicos Islands. So we're doing quite a lot of work over there at the moment on this species. Lots of work to try and get an idea of the population size there, because it hasn't really been done before. And we found quite a significant population there. So it's so far involved visiting the colony regularly, and we're doing playback, and we've got song meters deployed to try and record the vocalizations of birds, and we're going to be doing lots of other stuff in the coming months. So we're learning loads about them, and it's something that's kind of really in the forefront of my mind at the moment. So I think that's what I can hopefully contribute to discussion on that side of things. And then I've also worked on white-tailed tropicbirds, firstly in the Cayman Islands. So I was there for a number of years working with the Department of Environment and National Trust over there, Patricia. So we've done some work on white-tailed tropicbirds there. And yeah, I agree with everything that's been said in terms of the difficulty of getting population estimates and the need to often use aerial estimates, which are problematic at times. And it would be cool to discuss that, actually, something that Hannah said. I'd love to talk about this, because we've actually found in the Turks and Caicos Islands, because we're surveying the white-tailed tropicbird population there, that they're not really aligning with some of the published recommendations for the times when you get peak activity. And so I wonder if there's actually might be some quite a lot of variability between populations as well. So that's a sort of a caveat, and I guess a word of caution, and maybe something to discuss. So yeah, that's me.
Great.
Yeah, good points, good ideas. Thank you.
May I just comment on that, Patricia?
Go ahead, Patricia.
I have done some work on Cayman, but the people are monitoring them at the moment. The population seems to be stable on Grand Cayman, but we still need some help on Cayman brack. It seems to fluctuate hugely. But we find that lunchtime is one of the times they come back, as opposed to 4. That's one of the more accurate times to survey them. Okay, thanks.
I see that Tony Diamond is going to join us, is joining us at the moment. Hello, Tony, if you're here.
Hello. Hello. I was actually in the meeting earlier, but I was showing as a Will Mackin for some reason. So
Really?
Okay.
the joys of technology.
Stop trying to impersonate me, Tony.
What I did was I clicked in the email that you sent me. I clicked on that link and it got me in as you. So anyway,
Okay.
now I'm back in as me. My identity is now resolved. So I'm not sure I can offer very much because I've worked on tropicbirds in the Seychelles, Aldabra and Cousin Island. And there it's really very easy. On Aldabra, they nested just in small limestone islets within the enormous lagoon. They didn't nest on the mainland hardly at all because of rats and cats, I think. So it was a matter of, could you get to enough islands? And once you're on the islet, then you can find them because some of those islets are the size of a small room.
Yeah.
Some are huge, they're the size of a large room, you know, so that was not, I mean, the difficult thing was the timing. And you were basically finding the nests. I never did try assessing them from a distance without landing and checking nests. It would just have taken up too much time in that circumstance. I was working on all the other species of seabirds there as well. So, you know, I couldn't devote that much time to any one of them. What did come out there though was that nest success was very variable and it was very low in an El Nino year. In the red, it was the red-tailed and the white-tailed that were nesting there, and the red-tailed was very susceptible. It nested on top of on the surface, not necessarily in a cavity. And if the bushes dried out and didn't give them any cover, any shade, they would abandon. So, and much more so than the white-tailed, which was usually in cavities and more sheltered, more shaded. On Cousin in the Seychelles, they were nesting mostly on the ground in the buttresses of large trees. A few were nesting up in coconut trees, but it's a long time ago. This is over 50 years ago, and there aren't that many palm trees anymore there. So I think they're still mostly on the ground. Getting all the nests in any one breeding attempt was a lot of work, but the most awkward thing was that there wasn't an obvious season for them. So they seemed to be trying to nest all year round, and the seasonality of any one pair depended on their cycle. The length of the breeding effort plus the molt period, and then they'd be back again if they were successful. If they were failed, they might try once, and then again they'd go away and molt and come back again at a much shorter time period than an annual one. So it was more or less you had to check for them all the time, right throughout the year. There wasn't a season that you could really focus on. There were 2 shearwaters nesting there as well on Cousin. The Audubons, which I didn't even attempt to try and count. It's a forested island, and they're, as you know, they're very little, and they can get into really little holes in the soil. The wedge-tailed were bigger, and they were up on the hill with much less vegetation, and they had been used by the local people as food for many years. So the locals knew where they were nesting. And those, it was very, it was rough ground, lots of large boulders, lots of small cavities. so we had to sample an area and find out how many nest holes seemed to be occupied, with the emphasis on seemed. What I ended up doing there was following a few burrows that I could reach the end of with my arm, so I knew what was going on in there. Maybe, 20, 30, 40 of those, and seeing how many of those raised a chick. And then going around at night, when they were fledging, they were quite seasonal, quite a sharply marked seasonal. So when it was fledging time, all the chicks were fledging, within a few weeks of each other. And we'd go out at night and we'd catch as many as we could and check them for bands that had been put on in the nest from my sample burrows. That was, I still think of it as quite a brave attempt at an impossible problem. It ended up, because our sample of banded chicks in the burrows was so small compared with the size of the colony, that we grossly overestimated the numbers. I thought there were maybe 40,000 pairs, and it turns out with a much more focused census method later on by other people that it's probably half that.
Yeah, that is usually the problem with, well, not problem, but one of the difficulties, how to assess sampling, and are we oversampling or undersampling?
Yeah.
If you don't mind, Tony, I'll just cut you there, and we'll we'll talk about sampling and subsampling and
sure.
quadrat a bit later, I think. I think other people I know are doing counts. Shanna Challengers just join us. Are you guys doing shearwater count, Shanna?
Shorebird.
Yeah.
Only really during CWC and
Okay.
a bit if we record any during, because we survey between May and June, of course, and so if we happen to see any during then, we kind of record, but not like specifically like we're doing a shorebird count.
Okay, thank you. And I know we're expecting Jeremy White from Montserrat to join us. I don't think she's here. I just want to say that Jeremy is using a different methods than we've discussed so far, which is using acoustics to find shearwaters on cliffs and to confirm their presence or not. And you can learn about that on our webinar number 4, I think, which was about acoustic surveys. I'm putting the link in the chat right now. So that was recorded, and you can get more details on Jeremy's method. All right, just a reminder, if any of you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand using the tools at the bottom, I think it's under reactions, or chat, write it down in the chat. You can write in Spanish, French, if there are any French people, I guess not, or English. Okay, all right, so we have our 4 experts, 5 experts, 6 experts here. One thing that Tony mentioned is seasonality. So maybe why don't we start about that and talk about peaks in seasonality in Tropicbirds and shearwaters. Who wants to start? Will, Hannah? Rhiannon? Okay, Will is first. Go.
I'll start. The Bahamas, the northern islands are much more seasonal, and the other places I anticipate being more stretched out. But in the Bahamas, it's usually Tropicbirds nest starting in May, and they'll lay eggs in late May, and they'll fledge in August. Whereas the shearwaters are going to lay eggs, almost all of them lay eggs right in the middle of March. In fact, the day after the first full moon is the day that they all showed up. And I thought the colony was empty one year because I was there in March, and they showed up the day after the full moon when it was really dark, and they all landed and laid an egg. It was amazing. And then they fledge, by July. And then the petrels I know are winter nesters in the Caribbean. So Bermuda petrels and blackcaps. And then I think I'd like to hear more about the Tropicbirds and the shearwaters in the southern islands. So people can chime in there.
So let's go clockwise around the basin. So Bahamas, moving on into the Cayman and TCI. Rhiannon, can you tell us more about that?
Well, we're just learning about the shearwaters there because there's been nothing really, very little done on them. I think until this project started, there was a potential report of breeding in 2002 in the literature, but there wasn't confirmed breeding. So this is all new, but we have been back since December once a month to the Shearwater. So there's two keys which we found a large number of shearwaters on. Last season we found chicks and fledglings, and then we went back in December and we found adults in the nests. We went back in January, we found pairs in the nests. We went back this month and there's no one there. So I am assuming that they're on their pre-laying exodus, so shearwaters, quite often, the females in particular, just before they lay, they disappear off to sea for a few weeks when they're feeding, sort of getting ready, and they're building an egg, basically, and then they come back to the colony. And the males tend to, from experience of other shearwaters, I'm not sure, maybe will correct me, but I'm assuming it's the same. The males still visit the nest, but they're not sat on the nest waiting until the females come back and then they lay. And in other shearwaters I've worked on, it's usually the male that takes the first incubation stint. So it would be interesting to hear if there's any work's been done on that with this species. But I'm hoping that's what's happening and they haven't all deserted their nesting attempt, but we'll see. We're going to go back in March, so fingers crossed.
Try to time it so that you get there around the full moon, because then you'll be ready when they show up the dark night after the full moon.
Yeah,
that's the first night when it's really dark right at dusk and they can come in.
Yeah,
so I think that's why they time it that way.
Cool. Yeah, it's an anti-predation thing, isn't it? We see that quite often with other species.
One thing I would like to add is that we've had a lot of problems on the big protected colonies in the Bahamas with predation by mostly barn owls, which are doing probably better in the Bahamas than they've ever done because there are rats all over the place. And so I think the predation level is really high. One island.
Oh, there's too much going on. And then Laurie's asking me about.
I'm sorry? No, anyway, just
was unmuted. Go ahead.
Look for dead birds at your colony. And what I would do is go in a big colony, you can pick up all the dead birds and count them and mark where they are, and then do it again the next year when you're there. And it gives you a feel for how many birds are dying, what the death rates are. And on the island that had mice, the death rate was twice, even though the density was very similar and the island was very similar. Because it had mice on the island, I think it was bringing more barn owls, and the predation level was twice what it was on the other island.
So they're
both islands was too high.
And they're predating adults?
They're killing adults. They were the colony in the Bahamas that I've studied has declined by about 50%.
Wow.
It's huge, but it's still, there's still 1,000 pairs, but were probably 2,000 before. So it's not sustainable, I don't think. And that's all throughout my study, my survival rates were never high enough. I didn't understand, 87% is not high enough. They need to be in the 90s. And I think they're just getting too much predation. So watch for that.
Yeah, thanks. Good point. As you do surveys, make sure to record any predation by natural or invasive species. Hannah, can you tell us a bit about red-billed tropicbirds in your corner of the Caribbean and their seasonality?
Yeah, I can. And just on what Will was saying about picking up dead birds, it's a bit of a, we're recommending people don't touch dead birds at the moment because of the avian flu outbreak. So just be cautious if you do come across dead birds.
Yeah, you don't have to pick them up. You can mark where they are. And I actually have a rating system for the decay of the carcass, fresh, decayed, but still has flesh on it, pretty highly decayed, and then it's just no flesh at all, no smell even. And they kind of get picked clean in about a year, so you get ratings, and you can, I don't know how long flu can live outside of the body, but it probably isn't smart to pick them up right now.
No, just be careful. On Statia, the red-billed tropicbirds, they would start to breed really around September to October, but it was kind of stragglers who start off slow and then it builds up a bit, and then really by the end of December going into January is where you have a big peak of egg laying. And this continues really pretty much through to like March. And then you'll start to see the chicks fledging between, April, May, and then it really tapers off around June. But it's a terribly long season that you have to be out there, because we would go out once a week, basically for 7 months straight. So you do have to be quite motivated to continue collecting your data, because if you were to, like we were doing with the nest surveys, if you didn't go for a week, there's a big possibility that you miss a failure of an egg, or something happening to the nest. So again, it depends on the purpose of your surveys. But for us, we felt that there weren't quite enough birds between June, July, and September, and also because it was hurricane season, we felt that there was much less activity, and then it would pick up again right after the peak of the hurricane season.
Yeah, thank you. And just so you don't turn people off, what you were saying about going every week for 7 months, because you were specifically looking at breeding success and breeding. For a census, you would shorten the period, right?
Yeah, it absolutely depends on your question. If you just want to know the number of birds, then you'll go out when you think there's a peak. So then I would probably say, perhaps in January or February, you might want to go, and hopefully, if you can do more than one visit, that would be great. But as many visits as you can, but bear in mind that there are definitely a peak season in the year.
Yeah, and that peak depends on location in the Caribbean as well. Will, you have some experience as well in Trinidad and Tobago. Can you tell us a bit more about those locations?
Yeah, the timing sounds exactly like in Statia. Much earlier. We weren't there in September, but the red-billed tropicbirds were breeding right in January, and we were there 2 years in a row. That was seemed like a peak. And also the shearwaters were ahead there, and I believe that's the case in Martinique too. I think in Martinique they're going to lay eggs in January or February as opposed to March in the Bahamas, and it's going to be interesting to see in the TCI, which is really a continuation of the Bahamas, but much farther south, how early they lay. But it sounds like if that they're going to lay at the same time as the birds in the Exuma Keys in the middle of the Bahamas. So one thing I wanted to go back to, when everyone is talking about the aerial surveys with the tropicbirds, I think it's going to be very island specific based on where they're feeding, because when we put GPS on the white-tailed tropicbirds, or not GPS, we had geolocators, Patrick Jodas and I, and he found that they were going way offshore, like 300 miles east of the Bahamas. So they're, it's going to depend on where they're feeding, what their timings are, and it's even going to change throughout the years in some places, and even different colonies. Like I think the colonies in San Salvador seem to have different timing than the ones in the Exumas. So it's probably going to be something you have to do for each island to see when the peak of flight activity is.
So that's a good transition to actually talking about that. So Raylan mentioned at some point counting the birds in flight and trying to estimate the number of birds nesting based on that count. There are published numbers, ratios out there for tropicbirds, I think, not sure for shearwaters, of course. So can we talk about tropicbirds, and Hannah, what's your experience as well with counting the number of birds in flight around the colony, and how does that link to the number of birds actually nesting at that colony?
That's a good question. We started off doing aerial counts. I think it was once a month. It was a long time ago. And then what you would do is, like I said earlier, you kind of count every 5 minutes within your line of sight. And then you will basically, I think what we did was we took the highest number, and then we roughly said, well, what percentage of the total breeding colony do we think that is? And then you try to kind of extrapolate that. But I didn't directly compare it with the number of birds that I had banded. So I'm not able to answer that. But in terms of banding, like we banded, I think, over 500 or 600 birds in total on Statia. And I just felt that was a more reliable, because we were going to the site anyway to do the surveys. It was, it's much better to have those banding data. So we kind of dropped the aerial surveys, but I do recommend it as a method if that is something that people are interested in
and able to do.
Yeah.
Brian?
I was just going to say, there's a couple of published studies. Is it David Wingate who did quite a bit of work on this? And some correction factors which were based on him knowing the colony quite well as well, and being able to get some really good estimates of the nest. And I think those are the correction factors that are used quite widely. But it is based on the fact that the peak activity at that colony was, say, 3 to 4 p.m. And that's the problem. And so we found in the Turks and Caicos Islands last season that just wasn't the case. That I was like, okay, let's try going out. We've got to go some point. We can't sit there. I need a few students to sit there and just put them on a beach like for the whole day, but we can't do that. So we tried it, and there were no birds at all around the nest sites that we know are nest sites during those times. And we found that actually mid-morning was when we saw a lot of birds in the air. So I think it does require like colony specific studies and calibration as much as you can do. And I guess if you know that there's some studies which have shown that for when you know when your peak activity is, you don't necessarily, not everyone can go and count every nest easily. In the Cayman Islands, you just can't. They're in cliffs, and you'd need someone to abseil down to do it in a lot of these areas, as Patricia will tell you, they're really hard to get to in Cayman Brac. But as long as you know when your peak, what your activity curves are like throughout the day, and we know that somebody's already sat there painstakingly for a long time in another colony doing it, you can at least transfer those. This is maybe as best as we can get, transfer those correction factors over to your peak times when you're counting birds. Does that make sense? I don't think I explained that very well, but
yeah, that's pretty much what we did to find out the peak. We spent with a team on Sabre. We went from sunrise to sunset, and a team just spent the entire day looking, okay, how many birds are in the sky? And based on that, we were able to say, okay, well, we saw the most birds between 3 and 5. So we based our peak attendance surveys on that. But it does require local knowledge.
Yeah, and a lot of time and effort.
Yes.
Does anyone want to come to the Turks and Caicos Islands and sit in front of a...
Will, you muted, Will.
If we have a lot of people using the exact same counting methodology, like if we can standardize that, then we could actually compare the data across the Caribbean based on time and location, and try to get some better data on it. If we can use standard method, it would really help. So let's try to standardize that and provide something. Do you think?
Yeah, that's a good point. Something that may be useful for the whole region. All right, so we just talked about approaching. Oh, Atrame is coming in. We just talked about approaching the colony from a distance and counting the birds that are flying around the colony. So once you get into a tropicbird or shearwater colony, how would you get into counting or looking for nests? So maybe people here are not aware or not familiar with finding this kind of nests. So what do you look for? Are there clusters or individual? Can you give us some details on those species? And then I just want to introduce Adjerme White, who just joined us. Hi, Adjerme.
Hello, how are you?
Good to see you. Can you just tell us about your work with, very quickly, Adjerme, about your work with Shearwaters in Montserrat?
Hi, yes. So we do surveys for cavity nesters like the Audubon shearwater and the red-billed tropicbird. We're able to access areas where the red-billed tropicbird nests in a few areas on the island. What we usually do is we have a table where we're able to log whether or not we've recorded the nest already, and if they have an egg, if they're apparently incubating, if there is an adult with the chick, or if it's a chick unattended. We also note if there's anything to note about the nest, like if there is like a broken egg nearby and anything interesting that we think may be of use to us.
Yeah, obvious clues of nesting. Okay, and so I mentioned that for Shearwaters you also use song meters, and I told people that they could hear about it on our acoustic webinar that we had last fall. All right, so going back to the question I was asking you guys, once you are at the colony in that jungle of rocks or on an island with a lot of crevices or volcanic rocks, how do you look for nests? What do you look for? So let's start again with Shearwaters, Will, and then Rhiannon.
Okay, with Shearwaters, what I had found in a big shearwater colony, if there's a small colony, you might find a couple of pairs, you know, and I found a few places like that, and that you just count them. But when you get to a big colony, it's overwhelming. It's very, you know, there's no way you're going to count them all. And the only thing that I've found like that would provide order is to pick some random locations on the island. Just use a random number generator to pick latitude and longitude coordinates that fall on your island, and put some plots out, and you know, go to that spot and count within 7 meters or so of the center point. That's you can change the size of the plots you use based on how dense it is, but 7 meters tends to work pretty well for shearwaters. You don't want too many birds in the plot, but you also don't want a lot of zeros in your count. So 7 meters tends to give you about 2 birds a plot, and that was a number that is pretty good.
So that would be the radius?
The radius, the 7 meter radius. And so then you've got a center point and you use playback. I have some playback sounds available on my website, but you can just record males calling. And ideally a duet would be great. So I have a bunch of calls that you can use. I just make a recording of them on a loop, and I put them on a little micro cassette recorder. You can also use a cell phone with a really powerful speaker, but you want something that's louder than most cell phones are. So it's got to be a pretty decent speaker. And then you stick it in the nest and you get a bird to call. And once that bird calls, everybody around is going to call. They'll talk to each other. So you basically you're trying to get one of them to call, and then all the other ones are going to call, and you count all the nests in there. And then that'll give you a density. You know, you do 20 or 30 of those plots, and you're going to get a pretty good, you're going to be able to estimate it. And if you want to know more about it, there's a paper on it that I published, and I put a link in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. And just to be clear, given that shearwaters are nocturnal, do you do that work at day or at nighttime?
Always at night. And Alan Berger, I think, might have worked with Tony Diamond in Ascension and places like that. and they were able to estimate, they could see nest holes and then figure out what percentage of them were occupied. I've found in the Bahamas that you have no idea what a nest hole is. It's just a huge jumble of rocks usually, and you're not going to be able to tell whether there's a nest there. But at night, you might think it's barren, and then at night there's birds there. So you just have to go at night and find your locations during the day, and then go back at night. That's a good way to do it. But you usually don't have time to do that, honestly. So you just have to know where the location is. Use a GPS, go to it. When it says you're there, you're there. You mark the spot. You do your survey, and then the way this works, can work, is that in the future you can go back to that spot and survey it again. And you may not be in the exact center point, but you're at least going to be in the same area, and you should have a similar density, so you can compare 20 years later how it's changed. And that's really the time scale upon which these birds are changing.
Okay, thank you. Rhiannon, do you want to tell us how you do it? In Turks and Caicos, what to look for on the rocks?
So we haven't done any night work yet. We're going to be doing that coming up, but we've been doing it during the day, and you can do playback during the day. I mean, Will's right in that they're a lot more active at night, but we use, and in the Mediterranean as well, some places you just can't get there at night for various safety reasons, and in the TCIs it's going to be very difficult for us to do that. So I mean, you can leave song meters and you can deploy them at in a systematic grid, or in certain distance away, and then you can do something similar in terms of the vocal activity. But we've just been actually going to their areas and searching during daytime, and we're lucky there in that they nest. You can tell the nest. It's really actually quite characteristic. We found they're nesting in the iron shore, in the rock, and there's all these cool little potholes everywhere that have sediment. They like to nest in areas with sediment in cavities, and we use like indicators of activity. So that can be fresh guano. You often get a shearwater smell. There's quite often footprints and scrapes, and you get feathers. And if we mark any signs of activity that we see, and then we have a little recorder, and we stick our recorder in the hole, and we do the playback as well. I'm using duetting, and they will respond during the daytime as well. You don't get that domino effect that you might get at night that Will just mentioned. But if you're in a nest and you've got your hands stuck in the nest, they will respond. The other thing to mention, there's a lot of published studies on this for shearwaters, not necessarily Audubon's, but for other species. Their response to calls will vary based on whether it's a male or a female that's playing from your recorder, and based on whether there's a male or a female in the nest. So there's various studies which have shown the rate at which males respond to male calls versus female calls. And I can't remember exactly which way around it is, but there's some really interesting studies on that as well. So it's another thing to think about when you're designing your experiment, because you don't want to obviously bias. You want to try not to bias that response rate so much. So that's why the duetting is quite good, because you've got both going, and then you get less of a bias. I think that's it for now.
Okay, thank you. What about Tropicbirds, Hannah? Can you describe a bit the colony in Statia, and how do you look for nests there?
Yeah, when we first started really focusing on, okay, let's try and find all the Tropicbird nesting sites, we had no idea. So we just hiked the entire island, more or less, looking for the biggest breeding colony. I wouldn't even call it a colony on Statia because it's quite small, but a nesting site. And it was in a most unexpected place that we never, we had no idea beforehand. And it was, so it's just a question really of walking there. You might see a tail feather just poking out and flying in the wind like this. Or you might even just walk on top of a rock and there happens to be a bird nesting underneath, and they're going to scream at you. So they make themselves known. And they're not super colonial, but they do kind of, you can get clumps and clusters of nests together. So it's really just a question of going out in the field and looking and see if you can find them. And if you do find them, that's great, because then you can mark the nests. You know, you can number them. If you're planning to do a longer term study, you can get some numbered, you can even just use flagging tape. But yeah, so just get out there, get in the field, look for the little tail poking out. And that's really all we did. It was just elbow grease field work.
Okay. And just to mention, it is not all in rocky areas, right? Well, in Tobago, or like in Little Tobago, their tropicbirds are nesting right there out in the open. Is that correct? So sometimes under the trees, or
They're in a forest of Little Tobago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of in the middle of, not in the middle of the forest, but on the edge of the forest and the cliffs, like, so they can get to the side and jump out. But they're just kind of in the ground. One of them was under a hut that they had built, like an observation hut. The floor was all degraded and they were hanging out in there. One thing I've noticed is that like red-billed tropicbirds seem to be kind of docile and nice. And white-tailed tropicbirds, you better have Kevlar gloves if you're going to work with them. So that's.
Hiss at you.
Do you find that?
Yeah,
in other places?
They hiss at you, the white-tailed tropicbirds.
They'll, yeah, I mean, you can just walk by them and they'll start attacking you. Like,
Yeah.
Whereas the red bills seem to just kind of ignore you. They don't make as much noise, but they're bigger, so they're easier to see.
Yeah, and the great thing, just to add to that about the red-billed tropicbirds, is that they will not fly away. So you can approach the nest and they're not going to fly away, so you can actually access it fairly easily. Whereas I think when we did the training with Birds Caribbean in, where was it? In the Bahamas, I forget the island where. San Salvador, where we were looking for white-tailed tropicbirds, and I think they were more likely to try to fly away. Whereas the red bills, they'll just stay, and even if you take them out and put them back in, they'll go right back onto their nest, into the cavity.
And dogs really get after them hard. Like on San Salvador, while we were there, feral dogs were going in the colony and killing birds. They killed multiple birds while we were there. So I think they're violent because they are trying to defend themselves from rats and things. But for some reason, all the tropicbirds I've worked, the red bills I've worked on have been on colonies without predators. So that may be the case, but I guess Stasha has cats and dogs probably too. So it may be just a species difference.
Before we keep going, I just want to make sure that our panelists can stay, well, can you stay a bit longer? And for how long?
I have 15 minutes. And then
Okay.
I have to leave, unfortunately.
Hannah?
Yeah, I can do 15 minutes.
Sounds good, Will?
I have a meeting at 1:30. I have to.
Okay, all right. So we have a question from Anne who's asking, so if you have to investigate a rocky shore and you cannot get there at night, do you still recommend to go and see it if they're present? Is that your question, Anne?
It's really like you, so you don't, if you have a rocky shore and you think, well, maybe shearwaters are there, like what would you really do? Because we don't really have any confirmed shearwater nesting areas in Jamaica, but we do have rocky shores. And I'm just wondering, what would you suggest, like the most effective way of trying to see if there are any shearwaters?
Okay. Rhiannon or Will?
I would talk to local people and see if they've heard them. That's often you find boaters or people that have heard them. That's the best way to find the colonies that are really hidden, because you could walk the entire periphery of Jamaica and maybe miss them.
Yeah, I think that's where. Sorry.
Yeah, these colonies don't really have any people near, well, potential areas. They're really remote, and people probably don't go there very much.
That's where song meters are really powerful. So I mean, you can spend lots of money on these song meters. I've been using some in TCI, which I got loaned by someone who I was lucky enough to collaborate with, but they're like £1,000 each. But you could audio moths. I don't know. I can't remember if we covered that in the webinar. Audio moths are these much cheaper little device, acoustic recording devices now, and they're tiny. I've just bought a bunch for TCI. They're like, you know, this big, and they're apparently really quite good, and you can just whack them anywhere, and if you can put them at regularly spaced throughout an area that you think might potentially be suitable habitat for them, and then go, you know, once a month. They have batteries. You can put a SIM card, SD card in. They last for a long time. Then you can set them to different recording intervals, and the batteries will last for a month or so. And then you can, you know, that's how we've detected them in some places in TCI, and I'm about to deploy them all over the place, because I think there's a lot of areas where they could be, but we just don't have the manpower, like you say, to search the whole of the Turks and Caicos Islands. So that's how you pinpoint your area to then do your sort of more effort-based searches, I think.
I just share in the chat a link to the AudioMoth sound recorders. They're made by Open Acoustics.
Yeah, the only issue I would say is they have a massive waiting list. So if you're interested, order them about 8 months before you need them, because I've just received mine and I ordered them last year, and I don't know if that's a COVID related thing or what, you know, it's global issues that we have with sourcing materials, but they do take a while to get.
Yeah, it might be. Do we have any other questions from the group about cavity nesters? Or any comments? Natalia, would you like to add something on the techniques you used?
Nothing really comes to mind. I feel like people have covered a lot of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a question. So in the Grenadines, so EPIC is present in the Grenadines as a team of surveyors there. Are there Tropicbirds, and what techniques, what methods do they use to survey them?
Yeah, so there's red-billed Tropicbirds, and most of the surveys are just visual counts. There's not a lot of nest searching going on, because it's usually like fishermen that are doing a survey as citizen scientists, and they don't have a lot of time to find every nest. And often they're not even there during peak periods. So I guess one thing I would add is that other people have referenced having to do counts at non-peak periods, like not at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so when the Lowrys were doing the Seabird Breeding Atlas surveys, they did a full day count at Redonda and tried to get some sort of index so they could know, like, okay, if it's this time of day, then it, you know, and it's not that accurate, I'm sure, but it was like what they had to deal with because they were doing every island in the whole region. So they couldn't like get there at the right time every time. So I think even if you aren't there at the peak time, there could be a way to, you know, get some sort of index perhaps for what the population's at.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Something I also forgot to mention, which is a key piece of kit, which can be really useful for Shearwaters, is an endoscope or burrowscope. It's helped us quite a lot, because birds don't always respond to playback, even if they're in the burrow. So it's another way you just whack the camera down with a long scopy thing, and then you can get some really good ones now from like wildlife supplies. Yeah.
Could I just ask Rhiannon on that? Is it important with those scopes that the light is infrared, or is it safe to use it with a regular white light?
So we usually try to use infrared or red light with Shearwaters, because they don't seem to be so disturbed by it. So, and if I'm sticking my head down into a burrow, I usually use a red light on my head torch as well. They just
right. So
yeah.
I mean, could you put in the chat a supplier of these things? We use them on the island I work on here in the Bay of Fundy for puffins and leeches petrels. And the one that I had, which was from it looked like a husband and wife business in California. They've gone out of business.
Okay.
I don't know where to find them now.
Yeah, so we don't have one at the moment, but I've been looking into it as well, because I think a few of the companies that used to sell them don't do them anymore. We had a really good in the Mediterranean, and they're the ones that there are on the internet that I've found are really expensive.
Yeah.
But it's actually something I need to talk to a friend of mine about. So I will if I can find a cheaper supplier, I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amazon has a selection of endoscopes, so I'm not sure how good they are or how sturdy they are.
One more thing on the Shearwaters. This is Natalia again. I can't remember if anyone's mentioned this before, but they have a scent. And so we've actually like gone around just sort of smelling places, and then also, of course, is looking for feces coming out of crevices. But even if they're not there, sometimes you can just get that smell, and you know, like, okay, I need to come back and check this spot.
Yeah.
They also tend to reoccur in the same, like islands that used to be coral reefs when the sea level was higher. And then the water receded. And if you think about it, one of the Bahamians I was working with was like, hey, it's just like lobster hunting if you're scuba diving or snorkeling. I guess you can't do it scuba diving, but snorkeling, down into a reef, the shearwaters are in the same holes you would find a lobster in, at least and I can spot, we can be driving by an island and I can look and I can see certain plants like morning glory, and especially caper growing out. If you see caper in the Bahamas, in the northern Bahamas at least, you're going to have shearwaters there. I've never seen it without them. A big rock pile with capers growing out of it. The caper is in the shearwater guano growing out. So I can spot islands, and I've done it multiple times where we're driving by and I'm like, hey, there's shearwaters there, and we jumped out and we found them. So they're going to be in really specific habitat, I think.
So were you just lucky and you just called out the one that actually had shearwaters? They were everywhere and just called some of them?
I don't think so, because I've jumped out on a lot of islands and not found them too.
Okay,
I've walked many beaches and not, the tropicbird colonies in the Bahamas, often there are occasionally shearwaters mixed with them, but the tropicbirds like the cliffs that are crumbly, and they're younger. Actually, they're 100,000 years old. They used to be sand dunes. The shearwaters like the islands that were 400,000 years ago formed as sand dunes, and then they were submerged 100,000 years ago when the sea level went up again. And that seems to be the difference. The shearwaters like an older island, basically. Tropicbirds are on younger ones.
We have a question from Belina Colliamore from Jamaica. She's asking about tropicbirds nesting on the cliff, and asking for any suggestion of what to look for on cliffs, especially from a kayak. Anna, can you try to answer that question, if you don't mind?
Well, I think the question was about evidence of nests or babies. It would be hard to see chicks, I suppose, but if you wanted to see nests, I would just look for the tail. Like I said, you might see a white tail feather in the wind moving around, and perhaps at a certain time of day you might see them flying around. And if you are able to find that peak of the day when they're super active, you will see them swooping, and they usually make a number of attempts to get into their cavity because they're not very good walkers on land. So it usually takes 2 or 3 or 4 attempts, and then they go into their cavity. So that might be the best option for you, unless you had something like a drone. But yeah, the old-fashioned way, just sitting and waiting for some action might be the best option. And just one other thing that I wanted to mention, because I think Yvonne, you said that there was a publication. There's a publication that was done by Mandy Walsh McGee, and I think it was David Lee, right? And this was published in the year 2000, and we're now in 2023. So it's been 23 years since we've had a population estimate update of tropic birds in the Caribbean. And a year or so ago, I tried reaching out to many people on different islands to try and gather information, because I'm really keen to update this this article, but I've not been terribly successful. So if there are people on this webinar who are interested in helping, you know, or know people who have numbers of tropic birds on their islands, we could come together and make a collaborative paper and perhaps publish something in the Journal of Caribbean Ornithology. So just putting that out there, guys.
Yeah, you may need to send an email to the actual listserv too.
Yeah,
To more people, but it's a good time to ask about it, especially with the census going on.
yeah.
With Belinda, I really would be shocked if there weren't nesting birds in that cliff that you're seeing. And I want to second what Hannah said about watching where the birds land. That's often the way we found new nests, is just kind of sitting above the colony at a high point and watching where birds were landing, because they circle 6 or 8 times sometimes looking for predators, and then they'll go in. And they're really crafty too. They do not like being handled. And if they, you know, if you're have handled them, they will avoid you. They're really smart. They're way smarter than they seem. They seem like big dumb dinosaurs, but they're pretty crafty. So I guess they're velociraptors. But just watch them; they'll eventually land if they feel safe.
Thank you. I just want to mention that in the chat, Rhiannon shared the paper on response rates to playback. So that's when you're playing the sound on your phone or speaker. And then Francisco Contreras also responded to Anne's question about how to look for birds, and commented the camera traps could also be used in some areas. Cruise camera traps have a shorter distance at which they can take a picture, but it's a good way to also confirm presence. Thank you, Francisco. If we don't have any more questions, panelists, do you have any parting words? Anything you want to say before we close?
Good luck.
Or you can say with a smile.
Yeah, just encourage everyone to get out there and have fun doing it, because these are great species to work with and to monitor. And especially with tropic birds, there's a small group of people who've really dedicated their careers to tropic birds. So I think if you can join that special club, then please join us.
I would say repeat surveys of the same location are really helpful. So don't feel like, hey, I've only got one location. If you do that and coordinate and do the exact same thing that somebody does on a different island, we can really get some good data. And that's just as important to do it multiple times as it is to do a new colony once, you know, because like, as you can see, these indexes of how big the population are really depend on repeated surveys. Even the presence or absence of birds in a colony is just as important as whether there, you know, how many there are. At this point, we need to know whether there are birds there. So that little colony that Belinda found, if you could send us exactly the location of it, it'd be great to know. I mean, I think Anne was asking about, you know, birds in Jamaica. So that's one in Jamaica, Anne.
And Will, by repeated survey, you mean throughout the year, right? Not every year.
Throughout the year, different times of the day, yeah, and every year, but most importantly, even within a season,
yeah.
Multiple searches. Like when you let's say you search a colony a day, a bunch of shearwater colonies. If you can go to one place at night and repeat the surveys, then you can kind of say, all right, these day surveys correlate, and we find I found about 10 times more birds or 5 times more birds, something like that, 5 to 10 times more birds at night than when I searched during the day. That's why I did my surveys at night.
And also you mentioned a really good point at the beginning, which was the the link in activity patterns in shearwaters to the lunar cycle, and it does vary massively. Like I've done some pretty extensive night work in the Mediterranean, and you find, like, depending on even cloud cover, but also the lunar cycle throughout the month, their activity rates and return rates to the colony does change. So I really do consider that when you're thinking about designing a survey, if you can only go a couple of times.
Yeah, shearwaters, the new moon is the best time to be there for the shearwaters, and the full moon, when it's really bright out, they won't come in. They'll just stay offshore.
And they don't vocalize very much either. They're really quiet, aren't they?
Go ahead, Jimmy.
I have a question about that. So what do the adults that are on the nest do when it's full moon? Do they just not eat when if the other adult is supposed to return to bring them food?
If they're incubating, yeah, the partner that's sat on an egg will wait usually until the partner returns to alleviate it. So I've had birds, Balearic shearwaters in Spain, I've had a bird sat for a couple of weeks on the egg before its partner came back. And we have, especially in that species, they can have really long foraging trips during incubation. And then when the chick hatches, after the brood guard phase, where they're sort of, you know, guarding the chick when it gets a bit bigger, their trips are generally much shorter, and then they stop guarding the chick during the day and they just return at night. So
yeah, but they're going to dilly dally and play, and the young ones that are not breeding yet, they'll show up during the new moon. They won't show up during the full moon, so you're not going to even see the breeding birds that are like getting ready to breed in a hole or going to try next year or whatever. That they won't be there on the full moon nights, but they will be there during the new moon, guarding their nest. They don't want it to be stolen from them. They've got to defend. They have one thing in the world, is that nest, and they're going to defend it with their life.
Okay, so both shearwaters and tropic birds, they do not leave their egg unattended whatsoever.
generally,
if they start starving, they'll abandon the egg. And so if it's a bad year, what happens is that the birds can't get enough food, they won't come back, and the partner will abandon the egg. But it can survive a couple of days without being incubated. So it's not necessarily dead. If you see an egg that's in there unincubated, they might come back to it. But after a couple of days, it's probably abandoned.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other last questions? If not, we're going to close this webinar. I just want to mention, if you haven't seen it, Lisa has been sharing some resources and links in the chat. One is to the Seabird Working Group's webpage on Birds Caribbean's webpage. There are resources there. We're going to also, as I say, we're going to share more information about the census and data sheets and the list of webinars and quizzes and everything we've made, and also logos, great logos made by Hosmar. Lisa also shared the playlist for the webinars from 2022 that have been recorded. Feel free to go and watch them and share them. And finally, I shared a link to the listserv, which is an email group. So if you're not on it yet, I encourage you to join it. And that's where we share information about the seabird world, the Caribbean seabird world. Lisa, would you like to say the last word?
Thanks everybody for joining. This is a really interesting discussion. I wish I was down there doing some of these counts. I've had a little bit of experience surveying seabirds with Will, and it was great fun. Will, we got to go back to the Key South Bank. We should plan another trip. But thanks for everybody for participating. I do have one more link to share. If you could just give me 1 second to find it.
Okay.
See if I can find it quickly.
I was also going to mention, like, for the Lesser Antilles, at least, like, this is the time of year when tropic birds and shearwaters are out there. So if you're going to be joining us for the census, like, this is a great time to get started. Start your surveys if you haven't already.
Natalia. Yeah.
Okay, so I found the link. As Yvonne was mentioning, Hosmar did some seabird art for us. If any of you guys want to use that artwork for any of your work, like promotions for counts or for talks or anything like that, just let me know and I'll share it with you. But we also have made these into designs for t-shirts and mugs and hats and all kinds of things. So check out the link. It's a sneak peek to the store. And if you want to do like a group order, if you're on an island, you could maybe do like a group order and then just pay for one shipping instead of like multiple shipments. I think that they will ship to different international locations, but also if you have a US address, that might be more economical. Anyway, check out the items and hopefully you can get yourself looking spiffy for when you do your next seabird census.
All right, thank you everyone. And hopefully we'll have the next Seabird Hour, Species Hour at the end of this month or beginning of next one. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Will, Hannah, and Rhiannon.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for putting it together. Great job.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Ann.